listen-only mode.
Hello everyone and welcome to this live webinar on mobile test automation using Ranorex. My name is Jay and I'm part of the engineering support team here at Ranorex. Quickly before we begin our presentation, I'd just like to ask one of you in the audience to please provide me with some short feedback utilizing the Q&A panel of GoToWebinar, which is typically located in the upper right corner of your screen. I'll briefly wait until I hear from one of you that yes, you're able to hear my voice and you're able to see this slideshow on your screen, and then we'll continue on with the presentation. Okay, great. Thank you very much for your feedback. So let's cover the agenda for our discussion today. I'll start with a general overview of the Ranorex tool, and then we'll have a live cross-technology end-to-end test case demonstration. And I'll explain what we mean by end-to-end here in the following slides. After the live presentation, we'll have a conclusion section, and then we'll have plenty of time at the end for questions that you may have. Please feel free at any time to utilize this Q&A panel of GoToWebinar to ask questions. I'll be happy to answer them immediately, especially if they support where we're at in our discussion. If they diverge from the scope of the current topic, I'll simply wait until the Q&A section at the end to address those. I'd also like to point out this webinar will be recorded, and you'll receive a follow-up email that includes a link to download this video. So for a general overview, using Ranorex, you can automate applications on the mobile platform, the desktop platform, as well as web applications. And you can perform all of these tests in one tool, that is Ranorex Studio. One very cool feature of Ranorex Studio is that you can integrate your Ranorex test into your existing test management environment, such as HP Quality Center, Microsoft Test Manager, Spira, and many, many more. On the more developer-oriented side of integration, you can also integrate with your continuous integration processes, such as TeamCity, Jenkins, Bamboo, and TFS. These are actually just a subset of the integrations that are possible in Ranorex, but some of the more popular names. Now let's take a look. If we see here in the middle that we do support many technologies in the 3 domains, let's take a look on some of those specific technologies that are supported. You'll see over on the desktop side, we do support your desktop applications that have .NET technology, Qt, Java, SAP, and many, many third-party controls as well. Once again, these are just subsets of all the supported controls. For your web applications, you'll notice that you can test in the 4 most common browsers, that is Chrome, Firefox, IE, and Safari. And some of the technologies therein that are supported include FlashFlex, HTML5, Ajax, Silverlight, many JavaScript frameworks as well, plus many third-party controls. For mobile applications, you can test on Android and iOS devices up to the latest version, and you're able to automate native applications, hybrid applications, and even test your mobile website as well. Now, if you're interested in mobile automation, there is, of course, today our mobile webinar. For the desktop, I'd like to point out there is also a webinar next week that's being held the same time, same date. That's Tuesday at 1:30. And we'll talk about what you can do in the desktop and web domain. I'd like to briefly discuss what we're going to show here today, so I'll overview our test scenario. As I mentioned, this is a cross-technology test case, and what we mean by that is that we'll actually use both an Android application and we'll also use a website. Today we'll be using Amazon, so we'll actually use the Amazon application for Android to do some cart functionality and test those functionalities. And we'll even, in the same test case, jump over to the web where we'll also validate some things there using the Amazon.com website. So more detailed here, we will search and add an item to our cart utilizing the Amazon application on Android. Then in the same test case, we'll navigate to the Amazon.com website using Internet Explorer, where we'll validate that yes, we did indeed add an item, and then we'll actually delete that item from our cart. Then we'll jump back over to the mobile application, where we'll validate our deletion did occur. So as you can see, a true cross-technology end-to-end test case. Okay, without further ado, let's begin our live demonstration. So what you see here I have open is Ranorex Studio, and this is the default view that you'll have when you start your first solution. In the middle here is our test suite view. This is where you'll define the flow of your test. So it's basically the logical sequence that your test will have. To the left we have the Project Explorer. It includes all the files that are associated with your Ranorex test or solution. It's very typical that you'll see these in many IDEs as well, and it contains basically every file that can be used in your test. A more specific explorer is the Ranorex module browser. This contains only the user code and recording modules that you create in Ranorex, and it's where you'll actually drag and drop your modules over to your test suite view in order to define your sequence. As you can see, we have a few pre-created modules here, which we'll utilize for the website, but I'll get into more details on that later on. I'd like to point out that this webinar we will be showing a live webcam view of our device. Here I have a Galaxy Tab, so this is a webcam, and I'll be working directly with this actual device in order to create my test. So in order to start my mobile recording, I'll simply click on this default recording 1. And now we're brought to our recorder view. Here we have our actions table. Currently it's empty, but we'll see that it's filled with actions as I begin my recording. Below the actions table is the repository. We'll discuss both of these views very shortly, but first I'd like to start out by just simply hitting this record button to create some actions. As you can see, we have a couple of options. We can start a global recording, which will just begin recording everything we do on our desktop. We can choose to run an application and provide the file path as well as any startup arguments. We can even open a browser, selecting the type, and then giving a URL to navigate to. But of course, in this presentation, we'll be using the mobile recording. I simply need to select my device. We'll start on the Galaxy tab, and then I need to pick the application that I wish to automate, which, as I mentioned, will be Amazon. Okay, so let me quickly bring my webcam up, and we'll start recording on Amazon. When I hit start, you'll see that Ranorex launches the application on my device, and I can begin directly interacting with this device to create my recording. So our first step, I think, we'll hit the menu button down here on the bezel, and we'll just hit the home icon just to verify that we are indeed at the home page of Amazon. This is always a good automation best practice. You want to start at the same state every time. Excuse me. What I'll do next is hit menu once again, and we'll do a search. I'm now presented with the Android keyboard here, and I'll type in my search string. It will be software test automation. All right, looks like I put that in correctly. I'll just hit the go key now. Okay, what I want to do is just add this first book to my cart, but I'll just select it first, and I think this is a good point for us to stop and review what's been created thus far in our test. So let me expand Ranorex Studio, and let's take a look at our actions here. As you can see, action number 1 is to run a mobile app, and the arguments there are the device, as well as any startup arguments. In this case, we're just putting in the application name. This is all set up for us when we choose mobile recording after hitting the record button here. Our first action in the application itself was the touch on menu. As you saw, this is a hardware key on the device itself, but later I'll show you that we can run this very same test on a different device, and on that device this menu key is actually part of the UI. It's a soft key, but that doesn't matter to Ranorex. We'll still be able to utilize this action. So we have great cross-compatibility regardless of your device. After touching menu, I touch the home icon just to verify that I am indeed at the home screen of Amazon. We touch menu again, followed by a touch on the search icon. As you can see, there are nice screenshots to the right here that kind of give you a storyboard of your actions. Next was a set value action. There's actually two here. You can see I had a slight pause when I was entering this search string, so it did separate my actions. Now this will work fine, as you can imagine. First we'll set the value to software, and then that will be overwritten by this next action. But just to keep things clean, I will actually delete this action number 6. This is why we stop after every so many actions in a recording, just to go back and kind of validate that our actions were created cleanly, do any kind of cleanup that we need to do as well. So we entered in software test automation. We then hit the go button to begin our search, and finally we touched on that top book in our list. As you can see, as I'm highlighting these actions, you can also see down here that certain objects are being highlighted as well. Now if you look at the actions themselves, you'll notice that every action is associated with a so-called repository item. So as I go through these actions, you'll notice that the associated repository item is being selected down here in our Ranorex repository. And this is the actual UI mapping of your application. So this is how Ranorex is recognizing the objects in your application. To show you an example of that, we see the last action was a touch on this book. One thing I like to point out as a best practice is sometimes these objects can be named quite cryptic names. When I see that, I typically like to go in and rename these to something a little more human friendly, such as item to add in this case. You'll notice that when I change that in my repository, my change propagates throughout my entire test. So here, action 8, the repository item was changed as well. Excuse me. Just to show you that this is a true UI mapping, I'll select this object in my repository. I'll give a right click and select highlight element. Now what you'll see is actually on the application itself, we'll have a red border appear around this object. So there you see, this is showing that we are indeed working with the objects of your application. We're not working with pixels or coordinates or anything like that. We're actually identifying the elements through the structure of your app. Now a good reason for this is because say something were to change, if the developers change the layout of your application, you won't have to worry about changing your test around too much because we're actually identifying these by the elements themselves. So as long as the element remains the same, for instance, they don't change all of the attributes or maybe the type of the element, you won't have to do any maintenance on your tests. Now these are just beginning webinars, so I won't go into too many details on how we do this identification, but you'll notice that each repository object has here this Ranorex path. As you can see, it's somewhat human readable, and what you kind of notice is that we're basically stepping through layer by layer, starting at the high level and getting down to your particular element. Now, if you're interested in more advanced topics, including this Ranorex path, I'd highly recommend that you attend our Best Practices webinar, which will be held next Thursday at 1 o'clock. We go into a great 30-minute discussion or so about what we mean, how we're doing this identification, and what we mean by robust identification in particular. That is how we put in some buffers in these paths that allow your application to change without affecting your test. So that's our repository. Just to show you some other possibilities with this Ranorex repository, we can do things like create actions out of these repository items. So for instance, say I want to take a screenshot of my book to add. I can simply grab this item from my repository and drag and drop it up to my actions table and define exactly when and where I want to take that screenshot. So for instance, right before I make a touch on the book here, I think is an appropriate place. I'll release my drag and drop. And what I'm given here now is a smart context menu. I call this a smart menu because it does only give you actions that can be created for this particular element type. Excuse me. For instance, we see this is a mobile element, so we can do things like touch and swipe on it. So if this were a desktop or web application, you'd see instead mouse click, things of that nature. So these are actions that are particular to a mobile element, and that goes for these get and set values as well. You can see that we can only get attributes that are supported by this particular element. In this case, I just want to do a report action, which we see by default is a screenshot. So this will make a screenshot of my item to add and put that in my report for us. Let's quickly replay this actions table to make sure that our recording is doing everything we expect it to. I'll just hit the play button here, and you'll see Ranorex will start our automation on the device. As you see, we're hitting the home button, followed by the search. Here we put in our search string and hit go. Here's where we'll make our screenshot, and finally we'll just touch the item to bring up a better view of it. Alright, so it looks like everything's playing back correctly. You can also see here in our recording report, we have some things like the system information, as well as a log of all of our actions, which includes a timestamp, so you can kind of get a good idea of the performance of your test. Here you'll see the manual action we created, that screenshot of our item to add. You can get the full-size image as well. In this case, it's quite small because this is a mobile application. Some other things we can do is jump to the item. So this will actually take us to the action and highlight also the repository item associated with that action. So very useful in troubleshooting any kind of issues you're having in your test. Or perhaps it's a actual failure and you caught a bug, and you could jump to that item just to kind of see what exactly you were doing in that part of the test. Alright, what I'd like to do is just continue our recording here. As I mentioned, we're going to add this item to our cart, and then we'll discuss validations, for instance. So I'll start my recording over, or rather where we left off, by hitting the record button here. Back on my application, what I want to do is scroll down and find the Add to Cart button. It's giving me the options of visiting my cart or continue shopping. I just want to go to cart. Now here in our cart view is where I'd like to perform our first validation. Some software will call this a checkpoint. It's basically saying that we want to test the state of our application at this particular juncture. So for instance, I see here I have a 1 appearing in my little cart icon above. I think that's a good thing to validate to verify that our cart is updating. So what I'll do is on the recorder toolbar back here on my computer, I'll hit the validate button. And this will bring up the tree view of my entire application. As you see, this can get a little daunting, but you have two ways to navigate through this tree. You can, of course, find the element, particularly when they're named well. For instance, I see here that I have the bar cart item. But just to show you that you can also navigate through these little screenshots here. For instance, we're at the parent element of a picture here, or the Android element itself is in view. Say we want to pick out in particular this text object. I can highlight that screenshot and then click on it to access that level of my app. So you can start from the top here and navigate through these screenshots if you don't like using the tree. Just to verify that we are indeed on the proper element here, let's give the text object a right click and select highlight element, similar to what we did in the repository. We should see a red border appear around the element, and we did. It happens quite fast, so let me show it again real quick. Highlight element, and there we see, yes, we are indeed dealing with the one of our cart there. So now that I know I have the proper element, I'll simply hit next. And now what I'm given is a list of attributes that I can select to validate against. For instance, we see by default exist is being checked. And also, because this is a text object, Ranorex is smart enough to know that we're probably going to validate the text attribute. So that's also selected by default. But of course I can select as many or as few as I want. I'm happy with this text validation at 1. We're saying that yes, the cart has one object in it by performing this validation. So I'll hit OK to create that action. What I want to do now is back on the application itself, hit the delete button. And here's where we'll like to first navigate back to our cart by using menu and the cart icon. And now we just want to validate the cart icon is now at 0. So similar to what we did before, I'll simply hit this validate button on my recorder toolbar here. I'll bring up my tree, and because I know immediately where it is here in my structure, I'll select it here, validate once again that I am on the proper element. We'll hit next, and this time we want to validate the text is at 0. So I'll hit OK to create that validation action. Okay, so that about wraps up our cart test. So what I want to do now is just stop the recording, and we can take a look on the actions that we have now. We left off here at action number 9, where we touched on the item to add, followed by a touch on the add to cart button. I'm not sure if you remember, but this is actually out of our view when we're looking at the application. We had to scroll down in order to touch this button. Now you'll notice that no scrolling action was created, and that's because Ranorex will automatically bring your elements into view before interacting with them. So all that's handled for you. You don't have to worry about elements being off screen and such. Our next action was a touch on the Go to Cart button when we were prompted after adding. And here we finally get into our validation step. As you see, the action type is validate, and the validation type is we're checking that an attribute is equal to a certain value. Here's the argument where we provide the attribute name. In this case, it was text, and then we give the value that we want to see in that attribute. Just so you know, you can do, other than this exact equal statement, we can do certain things like just check that it contains a certain portion of a value. You can even do regular expressions, so you can get very complex with what you accept as a passing validation. And we can even do image-based validation as well. But in this case, we'll keep it at attribute equal because we do want our cart to be at one object here specifically. Next was a touch on the delete button. And you'll see this is one of those instances where it's a very... Ooh, I'm getting a feedback that the audio is cutting out. Let me check my settings here real quick. It looks okay so far. Let's see, test. Maybe this is better. No, that's worse. Okay, I got another attendee says that the audio is fine, so I will continue, but I'll keep an eye on my audio input bar just to make sure. So yes, as I was saying, this submit delete button is given quite a cryptic name. This is one of those cases where we'll want to go in and just give this a more human readable name. That's just a good practice so we can actually read these tests almost like a manual test case, really. They're very human readable, and we'd like to keep it that way. All right, so next we touch on the menu button and then the cart icon just to verify that we're in our cart. And finally, we expected that our cart icon now contains a 0, meaning that our deletion worked appropriately. Okay, so one thing I'd like to show is with these validate actions, I always think it's a good practice to make a screenshot of our application state. It makes sense that we're validating an attribute, but yes, maybe it looks fancy just to have a screenshot of our whole app in a report just so we can visually verify the state as well. So to make a screenshot of the entire application, I'll take this very parent object here, this mobile app object, and I'll drag and drop that as we did earlier with the item to add, just before the validation, where I'll create a screenshot. I'll do the same for my cart at 0. So here at this step number 16. Okay, all those actions look good to me. So what I'll do now is just quickly play this back to make sure everything works appropriately, as well as show you what our validation looks like in the report. And then what we'll do once we get back from playback is we'll split up these actions into their own individual modules, and I'll talk about how that's a great practice for reusability. So let's just quickly play to make sure everything is appropriate. You'll see we start the application over. Nothing new here, we're just doing a search for our book. Here's where you'll notice we hit the Add to Cart button, even though it is off our screen. It's just below there, but Ranorex will automatically scroll to it. Here we're going to visit our cart, which should be followed by our validation steps. In that case, it took the snapshot, the screenshot. However, Amazon is being a little slow, it looks like. It looks like our cart didn't even load there. There we go. This is the beauty of live demonstrations. You never know how the network's going to be. But as you see, Ranorex handles it very well. That's what I kind of had an idea of because of the lag there. We will have a kind of a weird screenshot, but as we see, we have a little more information in our log here. Right before our validation, we created a screenshot of our application. It does indeed collect the state, regardless of how the state really is. But what you can see here is that we do have our 1 appearing in the cart, and that's followed by a validation action here. As you can see, there are 2 line items with any validation action. First, we get a message of what exactly we're going to do here. In this case, we're validating that the text is equal to 1. And then the second message is whether it's successful or a failure. In this case, we did see our expected value, therefore we had a successful validation. We then hit the delete button, and we then did another validation. Here the screenshot makes a little more sense. We see your shopping cart is empty, and we have a 0. And our validation supports that as well. We see that the text was indeed equal to 0. So we got a good test case here of our cart functionality. I'll close my report, and what we want to talk about now is modularization. What I mean by that is we're actually going to split up these actions into reusable recording modules of their own. Now the reason this is good is because perhaps you'll have many test cases, and sometimes you'll be doing very many of the same actions, such as logging in, navigating to a specific portion of your website, for instance. And if you do the same actions over and over again, it makes sense to reuse recordings that you've already made. So for instance, I see my first 3 actions here. I'm running the app and then just verifying I'm at home. So I'll select these 3 as a good candidate for reusability. I'll give a right click and then ask a select move to a new recording module. Here I have some folders created in my solution, so I will put these in the Android folder. And what I want to call it is just something meaningful to the actions within, such as Start Amazon. We'll even specify app. Now you'll see that those 3 actions were carried over to this new Start Amazon recording. And you'll notice that here in the module browser, we now have the Start Amazon app available to us. So I'll just save this and then close it. Now my next, it looks like 8 actions here, are simply adding an item to my cart and then going to my cart. So I'll select these and move them to a new recording module, which I'll call Search and Add. Once again, we're brought to this new recording module, and we see that it's also available here in our module browser. So I'll go back to recording 1. What we have next is our validation of 1. So we'll just take these two actions and move them to a new recording module, which we'll call validate cart to 1. It's good to be specific for this in this instance, of course, because if we have 2 items in our cart, then this module will fail. So I just want to give it a very specific name. We're validating that the cart has 1 object. Once again, we see our recording becomes available. We touch on the delete key here. I'll make that its own module because it makes sense to have it separated. As a matter of fact, what we'll do, we'll just have it delete item from cart. So I can use this anywhere in my other test cases if I want to perform a deletion. What we have left is these 2 actions, which are navigating to our cart. Now this is a perfect candidate for reuse because we're utilizing the menu key here, which is accessible at any state of our application. So we can reuse these 2 actions. I mean, maybe it sounds a little strange to have a recording module with just 2 actions, but it actually makes sense in this case because we can then use that in any of our test case to navigate to our cart. So I'll just call this one go to cart. And this one will be important when we create our cross-technology test case in just a few seconds here. Finally, I have my validate to 0. And instead of moving these to a new recording module, I'll simply rename this recording 1 to be validate empty cart. Alright, so it asked me to save that change, and then we're brought to our test suite view, and here's where we want to just build up the sequence once again. I'll rename this test case real quick because we're going to test Amazon for Android in this particular test case. And I'll just build up the sequence as we saw before. First, we're going to start our Amazon application. We're then going to search and add an item. We then validate our cart to 1. We then delete our item from the cart. We then navigate to our cart. And finally, we are left with our default recording 1, which was renamed to validate empty cart. So here we've built up our first test case. Now I'll quickly rerun this, although it will be the same actions that we've already seen. I want to show you the difference in the reporting in particular. So this time we're running at the test suite level, and we'll be selecting the Amazon for Android test case to run. I apologize for the coughing, guys. I have a little itch in my throat today. Hopefully nothing major. So yes, as we're seeing the same actions that we saw before being played back, but this time we're using our modularized recording modules. You can see another difference here is that when we run from the test suite level, we get this command prompt showing a little more details on what the test execution is doing. But here's the exciting part, the full-blown Ranorex report that we get now. As you can see, we have things such as the test case overall, success and failure. A little boring right now since we only have 1 test case. But when you have multiple, you'll see this pie chart will show the overall success and failure rate. Some other cool things is that we have some great expand and collapse functionality here. So say I want to expand the details of all my test cases, in this case the Amazon for Android. You'll see that each recording module is capable of being expanded and collapsed, and that makes things a little easier to check on certain sections of your test report. This test report is fully customizable as well, so you can do things like put your company logo at the top, change the colors in the background. Anything's possible, really. It's fully customizable, and it can also be shared with your colleagues, both as the proprietary RxZ log file as it is now, or you can even save it as HTML, and your coworkers can view that in any browser. All right, so what we're going to do now is build up our cross-technology test case. So I'll start by creating a new test case. You can do so by right-clicking at the test suite level here and selecting New Test Case. We'll call it our cross-tech test. As I mentioned before, we have some pre-created modules just to save time, but let me show you, for instance, that these modules look very similar to what we did in our mobile application. And to show you that all the actions still look the same, of course, in this case we're validating now an inner text that's a HTML specific attribute as opposed to the text as we saw earlier with the Android application. But the same things are here. It's very human readable, and if you can perform a recording in one technology, chances are you'll have no problems whatsoever working in another technology. I seem to have changed that module, so let me just make sure that I don't save that. Okay, good. So yes, these recording modules will be basically using the Amazon.com website. And the way this works is that the application itself is logged in as the same user that my Amazon.com website is logged into, so they share the same cart. So we expect that when we make a change to our cart on the Android, we expect to see that change carry over to our website. So let me build up this test case first by starting the application for Android. We'll then search and add our item. We can validate our cart to 1 before going if we wish. Then here's where we'll actually jump over to the website. First we want to open Amazon website. This will just navigate to Amazon.com through IE. We then want to check our cart. This is validating that our cart on the website is at 1. We want to delete the item through the website, and then we'll close our website. Now what I want to do is jump back over to the Android, where we'll visit our cart, and then finally validate that the deletion occurred through the website. So as you can see, a true cross-technology test case. And this is also easy to see if I zoom in here real quick. You'll notice that these icons for the recording modules indicate that this is on the mobile, and then we're switching over to this form icon indicating that we're working on our desktop. All right, so let me zoom out here. And what I want to do is just deselect our first test case, which is the Amazon for Android test case, and simply select to run this test case. All right, so without further delay, let's run this guy. So here's where we'll add our item to the cart, and then we'll see Amazon.com open in our browser to validate that addition. So here we go, the browser is being opened. We're navigating to our cart. like it misclicked there. And we're performing some validations, followed by deletion. And finally closing the website. And back on our device, we'll see that we're visiting the cart and validating our deletion occurred. All right, so we have our cross-technology test case completed now. Let's take a look on the specific web recordings. For instance, the check cart web, we'll see here that even in our report, our information is very much the same as we saw in the mobile recording. For instance, here we're validating the inner text of the book, our software test automation book, followed by the cart. We're validating it's at 1. And here we added a screenshot as well, similar to what we did on the application, just showing that yes, the cart's at 1, and yes, we have the proper book here. All right, so with that concluded, let me show you how easy it is to run this very same test case on a different device. I simply need to make one change, which is to go into my Start Amazon Application recording module. And here at the Run Mobile App action, I'll simply change this to my next device, which will be a Nexus 7. Let me bring that into view here. You'll also notice from this drop-down menu that you can actually make this device name a variable. So I can create a variable and then run my test over several different devices in a sequential fashion. So here's my Nexus 7. This does also have a different operating system. My Galaxy Tab is at, I believe it's upgraded to Lollipop, whereas this Nexus 7 is still running KitKat. That won't matter, our test will still work fine. Let me also show you again, these hardware keys are rather software keys. As I mentioned before, even though it's actually part of the UI, when we make that touch on the menu key, we'll have perfect cross-compatibility. Alright, so I'll change this to Nexus 7. We'll save everything, and then I'll simply run this test once again, now on my Nexus 7 device. So to steal Java's, I guess, motto there, you can run write once and then run anywhere. Here's where we'll visit the website. It's a little slow today. And finally, we are going to close the website and navigate to our cart on the Nexus, where we'll validate our deletion. And there we have it. The same test case now running on our Nexus 7 was successful. Alright, so that concludes our demonstration for today. Let me wrap up with a few conclusion slides, and then we'll get to our Q&A section where I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have at this point. So to summarize, what you've seen is I used our object-based click-and-go recorder to create a simple but very useful test. As you saw, it was very, very easy to use, so you can even get your manual testers on board with your automation endeavors. It doesn't require a very steep learning curve at all. I'd like to point out that no rooting or jailbreaking is required on your devices. You can run them. You can run your test directly on the device out of the box. What is only required is that you download our service application, which kind of acts as a bridge between your Ranorex test and your device. As you saw, we use different technologies, namely IE with the Amazon.com website, and then we use the Android application for Amazon as well in the same test case. We also showed you that even though we had different hardware devices, that we're using different operating systems, we are still able to just run our test with just one simple change. We did all this in one test case using one tool. So why would you choose Ranorex? Well, it's quite common that you have multiple environments, devices, and software applications at your company. And with Ranorex, you get coverage for any technology with just one license purchase. There's no additional plugins that need to be purchased, as some of our competitors would have you do. We like to cover all of our technologies in a blanket way. So say you have a website, maybe you don't have a mobile application just yet, but you're thinking about developing one. You'll know that you're covered with Ranorex to begin testing on that as soon as it's ready. It's also quite common that you have frequent software releases, upgrades, and changes. And for that, we supply a robust automation. Now this goes back to, if you recall, our repository where we have that Ranorex path. As I briefly mentioned, it's a very advanced algorithm that will put in buffers through your identification to allow small changes to occur in your application without having to go back and perform maintenance on your tests. So out of the box, your test will survive through different upgrades and changes. It's quite common that you have multiple teams with different skill sets and responsibilities at your company, and for that we offer a broad acceptance. As you saw, we use the recorder, which is very, very user-friendly. We simply hit the record button and begin interacting with our application rather, as if we were just following a manual test script. And at the end of the day, we have a nice replayable automation. But say you're a test automation engineer and you really like to dig into the code, all of the background of our test is generated .NET code, and these are able to be modified, which we show in the Best Practices webinar. So if you're interested in some of the things you can do with our expansive API and the .NET framework, I highly recommend that you attend our Best Practices webinar, where we show off a little bit of the code usage. Say you have agile processes and comprehensive tool chains at your company. As I mentioned in the beginning of this presentation, we offer seamless integration into many such environments. And we have very highly detailed blogs on our website that detail how exactly step-by-step to set up these types of integrations. So you're fully supported with whatever environment you choose to use. And to manage time and resource creep of software quality, we like to say we offer you a quick return on your investment. Now this is the ease of use coupled with our very competitive price point. We like to say we can get your tests up and running very quickly, and with our fantastic support, you'll never be left in the dark. We want your success because it's our success. We have over 1,700 worldwide customers and are growing quite rapidly, especially here in North America. We have many service and training partners located throughout the world to assist you with both training, that is learning the Ranorex tool, as well as doing some types of consultation services, setting up your environment and assisting with your test automation endeavors. And currently we are headquartered in both North America, here in Clearwater, Florida, as well as in Europe, in Graz, Austria. Just to give you a quick outline slide here, as I mentioned in the beginning, you will receive a follow-up email that includes a link to download this video. And if you have any future questions that arise with, say, your evaluation process, please feel free to just reply to this email, and we'll be happy to arrange either a private demonstration or help you with any issues you're facing. I'd like to point out that on our website we have several other webinars, as you're probably aware of. I highly recommend the Best Practices one. We also have Screencast, a very active forum that has many power users, as I like to call it, where you'll find users helping other users with some of their problems and overall test automation topics. Our support team is also in the forum helping you with any issues you may see. As I mentioned, we do have also very detailed blogs. These are typically for things like integration, how to make Ranorex work in your environment. All right, so with all that conclusion slides, I'd like to go into our Q&A portion here. I have not seen any questions pop up, so I hope that you like everything you see. and I'll be happy to answer anything now. Of course, those of you who don't have any questions, please allow me to thank you very much for your attention. I hope you found the webinar informative as well as entertaining. But yes, I'll stand by for questions. Otherwise, have a great day. All right, guys, I haven't seen any questions pop up, so I will be ending the session now. Once again, thank you very much, and have a great day.